So first and foremost, for leaders, for those of your listeners that are leaders, and that doesn't mean by title. That means we're all leaders, right? We all have to lead our own life. We're the leader of ourselves. But the one single trait that all of the greatest leaders have in common, it's not that they're a visionary. It's not that they're able to be an influencer. It's not that they're able to think of all the big ideas. It's the fact that they're self-aware, Brandon. They're aware of who they are and who they're not.
This is the Brandon Smith Show, and I'm your host, Brandon Smith. And of course, the entire purpose of the show is one singular thing: to help you eliminate dysfunction and live a life more free from dysfunction. So our topic today is we're going to talk about this idea that while we often focus on our weaknesses, having a strength-based orientation to both work and life is going to help us be that much more successful. And so to help guide us on this journey, I have the wonderful privilege of having an amazing guest, Darren Virassammy, on here. Darren, so good to have you on here to help us guide through this journey.
Brandon, so great to be here. Thank you so much for having me. You have a great first name as well. That's the name of a very, very close friend of mine.
I saw that. He's your business partner.
Yeah.
Excellent.
My business partner. Yeah. His name is Brandon. So I'm a big fan of the name.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So for our topic today, as we go through this, now to set you up a little bit, you're both the co-founder and chief operating officer of 34 Strong. So maybe a good starting place. Tell us a little bit about 34 Strong. Tell us a little bit about kind of how you got into this journey, and then let's dive into this idea of being more strengths-based.
Yeah, I'll lead with telling how I got into it and a little bit about the why before we get into the what, because with your focus and for your listeners that are out there, I got a confession to make, and that was I was living a life of extreme dysfunctionality. And I'm thankful for a very, very sacred moment that I had with my daughter when she was 4.5 months old. My wife, my daughter, and I were on a beach in Hawaii, and it was our first family trip that we had taken together, Brandon. And one of those mornings, I was sitting up on the lanai having a papaya, just eating, and my daughter was sitting in my lap, and I was just relishing this whole experience of fatherhood, my first child, and just
cool.
like, wow, this is incredible, right? And in that moment, I'm sitting there, the Pacific Ocean's roaring off on my right-hand side, and my daughter, Kira, looks up at me and laughs out loud for the first time. And I was smiling just from ear to ear, and I was also absolutely terrified in that moment. The reason I was smiling ear to ear was because in that moment, I saw her and realized, wow, you have all of this potential. You're going to do X, Y, Z. You're going to be able to run. You're going to be able to talk. You're going to be able to get dressed on your own, brush your own teeth, go to school, all these different things. And I was terrified because in that moment, here I was with my wife and my daughter, two of the most important people in my life. And I said they were the most important people in my life, but I wasn't making that a reality. I was living a life where I was commuting nearly 100 miles per day each way, round trip.
What?
Not making them a priority in my life. Yeah, I used to commute from Sacramento down to San Francisco 3 to 4 days per week. I would not have the time.
Darren, that's brutal.
Them.
That's brutal.
It was brutal. So I'd leave in the morning. Kira, my daughter, was, still asleep, getting home in the evening, and she was getting ready to go back to bed. And it was really a function of, what am I really doing here? How am I living to my potential? So she reminded me of the fact that we all have potential. We all have things that we want to do. And I was at a company at the time where I wasn't highly engaged in my work. I didn't feel valued for being valuable and that I could make that impact. And I refused to live that life as a model for my daughter. So it's amazing, Brandon, how when those switches click in your mind, how you start shifting what you're focusing on.
Yeah.
And when you shift that focus, what was right there in front of you reveals itself. So 2 months from that experience, I actually sat down, met my business partner, Brandon Miller, and we were introduced by a mutual friend of ours. And we both had this desire to create workplaces where people could be valued for being valuable. We both believed in our hearts that everybody deserves a great place to work. Everybody deserves a great place to work, and that any workplace can be great. But you can't just do that in just a single iteration. It takes some work to make that a reality. So we rolled up our sleeves He was going through the process of becoming a Gallup certified strengths coach. And I had taken that assessment. I thought it really resonated with me and identified who I was and how my talents showed up. But we decided we had to do something bigger and better and make that impact, because we spent so much time at work. The real ripple for us wasn't just to employees, to leaders in their workspace. It was when we show up and we're valued for being valuable at work, how does that ripple to our home life, to our spouses, to our children, to our own parents, to our communities that we want to play in and that we want to be able to give back to?
I love that. That's beautiful. I love that realization that you had, but even more so, I think it's so cool that you had the courage, passion, and purpose to take that leap forward and say, no, I want to kind of not only reset my life, but help other people reset theirs. Awesome.
Yeah, and that comes from a great partnership. I got to give major thanks to my wife for seeing that, and realizing it was a huge risk in the short term, but a much, much longer risk in the long term to keep me on the massively dysfunctional path I was on with commuting down, just chasing a paycheck and not really focusing on us and what mattered to us, and impacting others.
So let's go down this path a little bit of kind of a strengths-based focus, strengths-based orientation. Maybe let's start by help me and my listeners understand, why do we not do this like we should? What are some of the things standing in our way? And then we can talk about how do we get there?
Yeah. So the fundamental question we've got to ask ourselves is, what starts to happen, Brandon, when we start actually looking at what's right with ourselves, what's right with others, instead of fixating on what's wrong with people? We've been conditioned from young, right? We'll go to school, we will play sports, we'll get involved in different things. And we've been conditioned societally to think that our greatest opportunity for excellence in our life and in anything that we do lies in actually investing our time in developing our areas of weakness. But the real thing that we should be asking is, what if we invested in our areas that we've already shown talent? What if we've invested in those areas that make us feel strong? We often will look at our grades, right? A grade comes home, a report card comes home. It's the end of the year now as we're going through this recording. But report cards will come home. We'll see our kids have, all A's and then that one C. And we'll oftentimes fixate on that C. And look, we've got to get to
my wife is laughing right now because that just happened to us yesterday.
And that's the natural response for us as humans, right? But my daughter, for instance, she loves math. She's getting an A in math. And the question we should be asking is, what if the 4.0 is not the end? What if it's not the top? What if it's just the beginning? Where does that go to? Where can that lead to? So when we invest in our talents, that's where we can get to strengths. And that's where we can get to these levels of absolute greatness and just sheer genius in our roles, because our greatest capacity for excellence does not lie in our area of weakness. It actually lies in focusing on our areas of strength. In that place, Brandon, we are not in a space where we can just pretend like we don't have weaknesses. Part of the strengths-based approach and part of breaking through the cycle of dysfunctionality and pretending that we don't have weaknesses or that our strengths don't matter is actually owning our strengths and owning our weaknesses. And when we own our weaknesses, it opens up the opportunity to create partnerships. The final thing I'll say about this is, there's this fantastic African proverb, and it's at the core of the strengths-based approach to life and to human development when we're thinking about this in teams and even within our families. Simply put, it's this: if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with others. So if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go with others.
Okay, so I bet a lot of listeners are like me right now, and they're saying, okay, I love this. This is great. I'm ready to roll up my sleeves. I'm ready to figure out what my strengths are and start to put some of this into practice. What's a good starting place? How do we figure that out?
So there's these three key areas that we have to think of in our life. And we call it the triple G. So we actually have an exercise on this that people can actually download at our website, completely free. It's called Grind, Greatness, Genius. So the first step is you got to pause long enough to look in the mirror and ask yourself these questions. And we've created a guide on how to actually do this, to just frame your thinking about where your talents show up, where your partner's talents show up, where those that you lead, where it shows up. We've had many people that are using this exercise actually as a monthly coaching guide for employees that they manage to just ask where they are. So what's at the core of this? We've got to identify these 3 areas. So our grind zone is going to be the areas that, Brandon, there's certain things that we've had a lot of practice doing and they just don't like us and we just don't like doing it, right? I can tell you from my childhood, my handwriting was terrible since the day I started writing. I write stuff in my notebook right now, right? I've got this notebook because I've got this crazy habit where I still have to write everything by hand. I put things down and I can't read it half the time, right? But I still do it. I don't know why, but that's my own issue to work out. That's my own level of dysfunctionality to work out, right? But this process of writing has never gotten good for me. And we've got to identify what are our areas of grind. And we're going to think about that through the lens of our work that we're doing and our experiences that we're having, even in our relationships. We've got to think about our areas of greatness and genius. And there's an important distinction between this. Our areas of greatness, these are going to be things that we do and we feel really, we feel pretty strong doing these elements. We're good at them. I had shared with you, for instance, that I'm a musician. I do that on the side. My main instrument I play is bass. Now, I feel strong when I'm playing other instruments. I feel really good. It's an area of greatness playing piano or playing drums or doing something along those lines. But my real genius is on the bass. So the bass is where I really can play at a very, very different level than what I'm capable of doing on the piano and on the drums and different things like that. Now, I'm giving these as just creative examples in other spectrums of our life, but it's important for us to go through inventory what we believe those are. And the way that we've set this process up is you can actually go through this exercise and you can inventory it for your work life and kind of actually even identify, well, how much percentage of my time am I spending in my greatness or my genius zone? A lot of times people go through this exercise, Brandon, you start realizing, gosh, I'm spending 70, 80% of my time in my grind zone. Maybe I should be looking at this differently. Is that really functional or is that dysfunctional? Is there a better way of doing this? How do I get to spend more time in the areas where I'm great and where I'm genius? Conversely, when we do that with others that we partner with, we can start looking at that, and what might reveal itself is their areas of greatness or genius might actually be covering our blind spots, our areas of grind.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so I know we're getting close on break because I want to dig into this a little bit more. But my first reaction is it sounds like when I think about grind, that's a pretty easy one for me to get a hold of. I would say to myself, yeah, like there's some stuff that I just hard, either feels hard or I just can't kind of get over the hump the way that I want to. So I can get grind. That seems like an easy category for me to be able to put things in. And I can also see how we can slip into a pattern of having our jobs consume so much of that time.
Right.
Now, where I want to go to after break is I want to go to this idea of the distinction between greatness and genius. Because it seems like that's maybe a harder line to parse out. Like where exactly, what makes this thing genius versus greatness? So for example, you can play all these instruments and you feel like you're in this place of greatness, but there's bass. And that just feels totally different to you. So when we come back from break, I guide us through how do we really identify our true genius? Because I think to me, that's the heart of this entire conversation.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we're going to go to break. When we come right back, we will take this on, and everyone's going to figure out their genius by the end of the show. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Here's your coaching minute for the week, presented to you by the Leadership Foundry. So credibility, as we know, is super, super important. Let's say now you've gotten into a new job. You've either got a new boss or a new team, and you're trying to build credibility really, really quickly right out of the gate. One of the easiest ways to do that is focus on proactive communication. We all do the reactive communication stuff. People text us, IM us, email us, and we respond. Focus on proactive communication, particularly status updates. It's so simple and easy, but it's a great way to provide quick clarity into what you're working on and build credibility. And I find it to be the best way to enhance trust quickly with a new boss. So put on your calendar either every Friday or every Monday, typically the end or beginning of a week, to send to your boss what are maybe those 3 to 5 things you got accomplished during the week? And what are the 3 to 5 things that you're going to work on the next week? And you'll find after about 3 or 4 or 5 weeks of doing that with your new boss, that they'll say, hey, those were really great. You don't need to send those anymore. I really appreciate what you've been up to. So give it a try. It's a quick way to build credibility and enhance trust right out of the gate. Welcome back from break. Of course, this is the Brandon Smith Show. And right before break, Darren was guiding us on this idea of strengths, having a strengths-based focus. But more specifically, how do we identify what is a grind activity, what is more of a greatness, and then what's more of a genius? And so right before break, Darren, I challenged you with this question on my mind. How do we determine the difference between greatness and genius? What are some of those key distinguishing factors that let us know truly what our geniuses are?
Yeah, well, so I'll lead with this. In the exercise, there's some great questions that we can ask of ourselves in there. And greatness, these are going to be the things that you do, Brandon, where you feel strong, you feel good, right, in doing them. It brings you some level of energy. Now, when you think of that as like an amplifier, since we started off talking about this through the lens of music, genius is when that amplifier on energy is just through the roof. You are so energized just thinking about doing these things. You step into this and you do it so naturally. In fact, when people say, oh my gosh, you're really amazing at that, you don't even think twice about it. You're looking at them like, what are you talking about? Anybody can do this. When we're in that state of making that comment, oh, anybody can do this. That's a piece of cake. That's really easy. That's actually a tell. And I'll give you an example of this outside of the world of music, right? So there's some of us are really, really well wired. We go into a room full of 100 strangers, right? We see 100 people and that we don't know. And what happens is that energy just wells up and we look at all of those 100 people and we say, oh my gosh, here's 100 friends I haven't met. I'm going to go through, break the ice, go through, make those connections with them. And they're excellent at doing that. And they will make that connection. They'll win those people over. They'll make those connections and those bonds. And they go through and they break the ice. There's many others will walk into that exact same situation, Brandon. And what are they going to say? They're going to say, there's 100 people here. I know those 3 people over there. I'm going to go ahead and head over, talk to those 3 people, invest more time talking with those 3 people, getting deeper. I'm not going to necessarily go and connect with everybody. Or I'm going to pick 5 people that I'm going to get to interact with and go from there. Those are actually examples of different talents that we have. So when listeners are actually going through this exercise, I don't want you to just think about this through the lens of task. Don't just think about it, what do I do? Did I get this done? Do I deliver projects on time? Those are important. But think of the things in your life that bring you energy. It can be, the reason I led with music was that's something that I find that actually brings me energy. And when you're conditioning those talents in other areas, it plays in other veins. As you know, outside of that, in running 34 Strong with my business partner, I do facilitations, I do a lot of keynote talks, and for decades, I never realized it, but music gave me all kinds of practice conditioning my speaking skills in being able to read audiences, connect with people, and going through them. So find those little, as Marcus Buckingham puts it, those little red threads that really light your fire. Those are going to be your areas of genius. The final thing I'll say on that is people can also go through and to Gallup, and they can take the Clifton StrengthsFinder assessment. They can go and take, you just Google a StrengthsFinder, and you can take that, and that actually helps to identify people's natural patterns of thought, feeling, and behavior that can be productively applied to their talents. And the reports will give you some framework on what to do next and some different questions along that.
You know, there was something in there that you said, though, that I would be remiss if I didn't address, and that is, when it's truly in that genius level, it's so easy that we're like, well, anybody can do this. So we're actually don't value it as much in our mind because it comes so easily. And it's easy to not recognize that that's a genius thing because it just comes so natural to us.
You got it. That's exactly what it is. So a great way to take inventory as you're going through is ask yourself, what are the things that people tend to come to me, or that maybe the other side of this, Brandon, is sometimes the things that you get frustrated at, right? So if you're one of those folks, you sit in meetings and you're going through and you're saying, gosh, can't everybody see where this is going? Or why can't this person, or why can't others see what the future looks like, what the vision looks like? Guess what? That's your talent. That's your unique gift. You might be able to actually see the future and the vision with a level of clarity that other person doesn't have those talents. That's your unique gift to give back to others and create those impacts. So part of it is when you have these tells that we're experiencing in life, is asking yourself, how do I move from frustration to fascination? That's where you go after you've kind of unlocked the whole grind greatness genius experience in thinking through that.
Yeah, and then so automatically makes me think there's a couple things that are good indicators for us. Is it easy? And also, is there energy? And the energy can be that I get excited and energized. I can kind of feel it flowing through me. But energy can also show up in frustration, irritation. That's a form of energy too. Like, why can't anybody else? What's everyone else's problem around here? And
you got it.
And
you got it.
Those are good indications.
And when we're energized to do this, the other thing that I said, not so directly, but on that, another third tell that's in there is third-party validation. So when others are coming to you and they're saying, oh my gosh, that was amazing, I really valued your insight, and you're thinking, again, anybody can do this, it's no big deal. That's a tell, because others have validated how that talent just shows up out of you without even trying.
Yeah. So very practically speaking, I had a good friend of mine a couple of years ago, and she's been a client of mine and also a friend, and she's great with words. Like one of her gifts I recognize as strengths is her ability to just have a mastery of language. And so I asked her, I said, Rachel, what are my 3 superpowers? And it was a great way to kind of get someone else to tell me from what they saw in me. And it stuck with me what she said. And I've always held on to those are my strengths. Those are my geniuses. Even though I might not have come up with those same words, I honor the fact that she's right. There's also an acceptance piece, I think, around this too.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we take this and apply it in the workplace, whether it's with our teams, organizations? How do you create a strength-based culture?
So first and foremost, for leaders, for those of your listeners that are leaders, and that doesn't mean by title. That means we're all leaders, right? We all have to lead our own life. We're the leader of ourselves. But the one single trait that all of the greatest leaders have in common, it's not that they're a visionary. It's not that they're able to be an influencer. It's not that they're able to think of all the big ideas. It's the fact that they're self-aware, Brandon. They're aware of who they are and who they're not. So when we apply this into a workplace sort of capacity, it starts with that leadership place. But when we take it to the team level, we've got to make sure that we're connecting the dots to the outcome that we want to have. So when we're thinking of creating a strengths-based team, it's this process of knowing where people's talents are, how they show up, how they can uniquely contribute and make that impact. Part of getting to that place and disrupting the dysfunctional patterns that can take place in workplace is this process of what we call confident vulnerability. So it's confident in where you shine, and we're confident in where we're blind. So if I know that I don't do certain things well, then who are my team members that I can partner with or I can go to and be okay saying, I'm weak here, and being cool with that, because where we're weak, somebody else might be strong, and it gives that chance for somebody else to contribute. Now, where this actually leads to is a culture of employee engagement. And when we're thinking of people showing up engaged in their work, it means that they're able to be valued for being valuable. Their contributions are able to make the impact that they only hope that it can make, and they can be seen through that lens. Because so often we get put into roles where we're being forced to play to our areas of weakness, and we're getting drowned out. So that's how that goes through. I would suggest for any teams that are intact, take the Strengths Finder. Like, go through, take that assessment, get people taking that so you can start identifying what that language can be like. And then you can actually measure employee engagement as well. There's many organizations have a lot of engagement surveys that they're taking. Gallup has the Q12. There's a company called Spark that has one, an engagement survey. And there's many different iterations of this. You got to find the one that really tells the story that you want.
So now if we take it outside of the workplace and just broaden it to life, how can we bring this orientation more into our life in general?
Yeah, so what happens when we start seeing our kids through the lens of talent, right? What happens when we start seeing our partner, our spouse through the lens of talent, our family, our friends? It's pretty mind-boggling what can happen with relationships. So on a personal level, my wife and I, on the StrengthsFinder profile, we have very different talents. Actually, some of her top talents are some of my bottom talents. In that, understanding that has so helped our relationship, because if she's going down a certain pathway and I might be going to that place of what we're talking about, that energy of like frustration, why are you doing this? Why are you not seeing this? She oftentimes is seeing something that I'm completely missing, and vice versa. There's some of my talents play in spaces where she doesn't necessarily go to as quickly. And we can see that and be able to lean into those areas that would have caused us frustration in the past and move them towards fascination. It helps us to actually see those in our life that we love, that we care about, that we're working with, through the lens of not just, hey, you're different, we disagree, but through the lens of, hey, you're approaching this, we're looking at the exact same problem, we're looking at the exact same issue. We're actually aligned on the outcome that we want to get to, but we're seeing this through very different lenses. So it comes to this whole process, Brandon, of yes to well-rounded teams, and that means teams at work, teams at home, teams that we're part of in our community. So yes, those well-rounded teams, and no to just trying to invest in just being well-rounded at everything. When we take this further to our children, my business partner, Brandon Miller, and his wife, they actually have a book on this topic. I have it right here. It's called Play to Their Strengths. It's coming out on the 4th of June. And it's all about their experience having parented 7 kids together. No adoptions, no foster kids, no none of that, no twins, 7 actual kids. That laboratory that they've had from childhood all the way up to 20-something-year-olds that now have their own children, what they've learned in that. And it's a really practical approach on how to do this. What are the questions that we do? And you can even get into identifying what are your parenting strengths and starting to identify, well, what are my kids' strengths? What are the ways that they show up? How can I adapt my parenting to that? What are the questions that I can shift that will help bring out their talents or reveal them to me? We can see each other through the lens of talent, and my gosh, it can move the needle.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it goes back to your point earlier around self-awareness, but also recognizing and being aware of other people's strengths. And then I think one more piece, and I think you're probably saying this implicitly, and then vocally acknowledging another person's strengths. So
absolutely.
I was, yeah. So I don't have 7 kids. I've got 3 kids. So 17-year-old, 14-year-old, and 12-year-old. And one of the things that my wife and I try and practice pretty regularly is naturally we tell our kids that we love them. I think every parent does that. I think that's kind of table stakes. I think that's a good thing, and I'm not dismissing it, but it's not quite complete if you don't also tell them that you like them too. So right. I love you, and I also like you. And here's what I like about you. You've got this great ability to stand in front of a stage and deliver a performance. Or you're so thoughtful and organized in how you keep your room clean, or you do this thing that I really admire. And that's kind of like taking a strength that you see and lifting it up and using that.
That plays right into that third-party validation that we were talking about on the organizational side. That's a great example of it. Yeah, just finding those things that you find unique about the person and validating those. You're also going to find that some people are more cerebral in their thinking side, some are more verbal processors, and being able to ask that question. So knowing that if you ask a question of certain people, they're going to actually need a little bit of time to think and then get back to you. There's others, you're going to put that out there and they're going to fire off all these different answers. And there's not a right or a wrong way. One might be verbally processing and you're literally witnessing their thinking cycle as it's spoken out of their mouth. Somebody else, they might need to go stare out the window for a little while. And you might be looking at them saying, hey, why aren't you doing anything? How come you're not getting anything done? And they might be thinking about the cycle of what needs to get done before they actually act on it. That's just one of the examples there is how it plays.
Yeah, great. So I know we're getting close here to the end of our show already. So I always ask all my guests this question. What's one life hack you have for us on how we can live a life more free from dysfunction, either personally or professionally?
So I think this applies to both. And I first learned of this question from Tony Robbins. I don't know that it's exclusive to him, but it's a powerful question, and it's also an incredibly challenging question to ask of ourselves, depending on where we're at. So that question is simply this: when we can shift to asking, why is this happening for me? Or why is this happening for us? As opposed to saying, why is this happening to me? So again, the question is, why is this happening for me? Not why is this happening to me? When we shift that perspective as to why is this happening for us, we are showing that, hey, if we've got knocked down, if a completely treacherous situation has been thrown at our way, there's going to be something good that can and will come out of it, even though we might not know the answer at that time. But when we plant that into our mind, we start removing much of the dysfunctionality that goes when we put ourselves into that victim mindset. Yeah. That's what we have to debunk. And that question really helps us to get there in the hardest of times.
Yeah, I love that question. That's a beautiful, simple tweak in language, but an important one because it changes a whole orientation. Well, Darren, this has been great.
It's important to ask it in good times as well, not just in bad times. So that was
Well, I think in the good times it's easy. It's like, oh, of course it's happening for me because I deserve all of this. but in the tough times, it does make it look more like a gift, like this adversity or this bad situation's more. How can I view it more as a gift or something that's going to help me grow or change? Darren, this has been great. If people want to learn more about you, more about 34 Strong, what you all are up to, where can they go?
They can find 34 Strong just at 34strong.com. We are on Facebook as well as LinkedIn, Instagram. Myself personally, if you want to reach out to me, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn at Darren Virassammy. You'll probably want to put that spelling in the in the show notes there. And then I'm also on Facebook. Would love to connect with you there and follow a little bit more about what I'm doing and learn more about what you're doing as well.
Yeah, Darren, this is great. Keep up all the great work. Keep up all the great work and good work you're trying to do in the world. We definitely need it. And thank you for listening and watching the show. Of course, you can follow us with a new show every Sunday at 7:30 p.m. when we drop our new show. And when you can listen to it on iTunes, you can check it out on Facebook Live. And if you haven't been to the Workplace Therapist recently, check it out. We always are adding new content there to help you live a life more free from dysfunction. And if you've enjoyed the show, we certainly hope you have, please rate, review, subscribe so others can find us and join the tribe. And until the next show, have a great week and an awesome life.